Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you, and joined as we are on, I think about every third Friday by Senator Kevin Cramer. Always happy to have you, Kevin.
It's always my pleasure. It's funny you say every third Friday, because when I looked at it today, I thought, has it already been that long? But I think it's a little bit more your schedule, my schedule, when it works.
Sometimes
possibly every third Friday.
It's on my calendar for every third Friday, but it gets moved around a lot because it's just
more on me than you. But anyway, I like it when it works.
Yeah,
so
definitely. Well, always happy to have you. State of the Union last night. You had a pretty strong response to it, saying it was the worst you'd ever seen. It was kind of funny. I did write a column about this, and I'm certain you probably haven't seen it because it just went up a little ways before. But I took one of your sentences where you said. You were talking about how it was an old man. You said, we listened to an unhinged, angry, bitter old man screaming and pointing his finger at all his naughty children instead of taking responsibility for the messes he caused. And I quoted that without indicating at first who it was from. And I said, reading that cold, who do you think he's talking about? Because I feel like that's kind of a Rorschach test for our politics right now, where if you're not a Trump fan, you think that person's talking about Trump. And if you're not a Biden fan, you think they're talking about Biden. And I'm over here with the 60% of Americans that kind of wish we weren't having a rematch of these two people and saying, this is our problem, is that it's angry old men ranting. And these are the two people who are running to be president.
Which is sort of interesting, Rob, in that which one of these guys are going to recognize, okay, I've solidly won my party's nomination. Now let's talk to those 60% and see how we can communicate to the undecided voter, the swing voter in a swing state, like I like to say. Which, by the way, is only a handful of states, and that's part of our politics these days too. Is that presidential campaigns come down to just a handful of swing states, and so. You're right on that front. What I'd say though about last night that was unusual, and I've not seen anything quite like it that I can recall anyway, and that is how regularly he referred to his opponent in his State of the Union speech, and that I found very peculiar.
It was a political speech. I don't think there's any question.
And I don't know that it was necessary. Now he may have data and surveys and whatnot that show that he has, he's being seen as this doddering old fool that just doesn't really make sense when he talks. He doesn't project strength, and maybe he was trying to project strength by appearing more angry and that finger pointing thing. And by the way, here's another thing that's it's very different in the chamber than it is on TV, and that is the acoustics of the place. So when a speaker is giving these loud sort of yelling speeches, it's muted on TV because it's a direct, audio link right into the.
And you got an audio engineer who I'm sure is adjusting. Exactly they don't want people's television speakers being blown out.
Exactly right. So there was that differentiation. But to your point about two, elderly men running for re-election, that is what we have. That's the head-to-head that we have. And I just thought last night, if Joe Biden was trying to project strength when he's been accused of projecting weakness, that didn't look like strength to me. And I think even more than his demeanor and sort of the tone and the partisan part of it was that constant reference to Donald Trump, which I think made him look not only weak but insecure about Donald Trump. And but again, his polling numbers are so bad that maybe they were looking for any little thing that could trigger a different outcome or a different trajectory. I happen to think we give way too much credit to State of the Union addresses and their impact on people. But
well, at least on people who don't follow this stuff. I mean, that's the danger we're always in. Is those of us who are paying attention all the time. The State of the Union's a big deal. For the general public, I mean, I don't know the extent to which it penetrates there, which is probably why everybody's putting on costumes now and hooting and hollering and shouting. Everybody's trying to break through. What did you think of that? And to be honest, like I don't like the Democrats getting dressed up. I don't like Representative Greene shouting at or in previous Representative Boebert. I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary. It's the president's night per the Constitution, and he's delivering an address to Congress. Can we not? I mean, I don't know. How do you feel? I mean, you had some pretty bombastic things to say about it after the fact, but you weren't shouting them at him while he was down on the rostrum.
No, in fact, what I think it's strategically dumb if in fact you want to make a political point. There's that old adage, never murder a man committing suicide. And if you really believe that his performance is that bad, and I do, and if you really believe that he's not persuading anybody, and I don't think he was, I don't think you can rewrite the history of whose fault it is at the border and somehow come out of that with people going, gee, isn't he solid on the border? I just think you have to trust the viewing public more than you are if you're putting on a MAGA hat or you're yelling from the rafters things at the president. And what I think it does is I think you give up moral high ground when you engage in antics that diminish the moment, when the president himself is already doing that just by his record and his speech itself. I think the best thing you can do if you want to diminish the speaker is to just stare at him. I do think, though, that there are moments of unity. There are moments when what the president says, whether it's introducing somebody or talking about a particular topic, or certainly if he's cheerleading for America, I think it's entirely appropriate and it's in the best interest of you as a public official and the people that are watching. If you acknowledge that with an applause and standing ovation. I don't think you have to go over the top.
Well, I mean, applause is one thing. Like if the president says something, everybody likes, or even if just one side likes, giving him some applause. I mean, to me, that's
normal. But I do think, like I said, I think you actually hurt your own cause when you've got the moral high ground and then cede it by your own behavior. Yeah. And that's part of but that's what we're seeing nowadays. It's what we're seeing on both sides. And I think it's somewhat undignified, but it's also, I'm afraid, it's a sign of the times, at least for now. And,
there's voters who want it too. I mean,
for sure there are. I don't know that those voters are undecided about their politics. Well,
yeah, that's true. One thing I thought was really interesting, and I I describe it as a strategic retreat on the border. I mean, we can probably have a debate about whether or not those are the right words, but I thought those were interesting words about it. Yeah. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems like Republicans have Democrats in a place on border security that they haven't, at the very least, in a long, long time. I mean, I don't want to say it's unprecedented or anything like that, but I mean, Republicans are in a good spot politically. It kind of makes me, when I'm looking at the way Joe Biden is talking about the border now and basically conceding a lot of points that Republicans have been making about the border for a while now. It takes me back to that bill, the border bill, negotiated with Senator Lankford that you and others voted to kill. Isn't that, I mean, it's making me think, why couldn't that bill have been brought to the floor? Why couldn't amendments have been placed on that bill? I feel like it was a good starting place and Republicans could have got even a heck of a lot more. And maybe really have made a difference at the border that everyone says we're so concerned about. Sure.
Well, you probably heard me say a couple of times during that discussion, and I was one of the holdouts. People were trashing it before they ever read it. Right. Well, they were trashing it before it was ever made public. Right. Partly because the process is so broken. So, Rob, there's right away when a deal's negotiated among a small group of people, apart from the committee process and the, subject matter experts testifying in the committee, and having amendment votes, when that happens, there's immediately a suspicion of the bill. And therein lies what I think is the biggest problem we face as an institution in Congress, and we have to restore it when we get new leadership. That is restoring the regular order process of hearings and subject matter witnesses, and and then amendment votes and floor votes. And we're working on that right now as we sort of audition new Mitch McConnells, if you will. So that's the first problem with what was going on. It wasn't so much the substance of it, although for some of us, the very high price that James had to pay for much better public policy, quite honestly. And he doesn't get enough credit for how good that public policy was. And by the way, to the president's credit, he in trying to sort of reverse this, the direction of this argument, he really did state the facts of the bill quite effectively last night. I don't think anything he said was wrong. Others will say, well, it codifies 1.8 million people, across. It doesn't do that. But the part that really was most concerning to me in the bill from a policy standpoint was providing funding for sanctuary cities. To me, that sort of violates the whole thing. It becomes that pull factor. It's the billboard. Come to New York, commit crimes. We promise we won't arrest you. We'll turn you free as long as you're an illegal immigrant. And just to reward that behavior, that was a bridge too far from the policy standpoint. But to be fair to James and to the people that worked hard on it, the policy conclusions were pretty darn good. And I don't know that in a divided government you could ever get better. And the only way to get better than a divided government is for Republicans to have 60 senators, which has never happened, at least not since the very early days of our country. It's not happened.
So if all that's true, if it's the very best we could get in a divided government, and we're never going to not have a divided government, at least not anytime on probably in our lifetimes, or who knows, but not anytime soon. It brings me back. Why not bring the bill? Why not? You don't like the heavy price that he paid. Why not take some of that out? Democrats kind of need. They need this issue to go away.
They kind of do. But
why not put the screws to them and get some of those things out of the bill and make it even better, even more palatable?
And which is exactly why what we ought to do, and I'd be all for this, by the way, is take that same work that's been done by this handful of members and put it into the committee, the Homeland Security Committee, and then prepare the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee to take it up after it's authorized, and then have the subject matter experts come in, have the Customs and Border Protection leadership come in, have parents of and victims come in, and all of these things, dreamers, and all of these things.
Which all, by the way, not that any of this should necessarily be done for campaign reasons, but that seems like a pretty good debate for Republicans to be having during the heart of the election year.
No question.
Right?
That's exactly right, Rob.
So what's stopping that from happening?
Yeah. So what's stopping that from happening is the laziness of our legislating. It's a gravitational pull to simplicity, if you will, and to concentration of power. So we've seen it most prominently in things like appropriations bills, and that's what I meant by we have to, as we start fresh with a new leader next year, hopefully a new majority leader in the Republicans get a majority. We have to start fresh with a ironclad, signed in blood commitment that we're going to get back to regular order and use the committee process. And the bipartisan infrastructure bill suffered somewhat from that. The difference being the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, I was able to have a great deal of influence on the highways and bridges piece as well as the water infrastructure piece. And so we passed those two bills unanimously out of our committee. And then the Commerce Committee passed some stuff on broadband that also became an important part of the bill. And they did it through the regular order process. And that became the foundation. But ultimately, it came down to a gang of like 8 people and, 4 from each side, taking those things and several other things. And they wanted to do their own infrastructure bill. And then the bill becomes suspicious to people again. And this is why I wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago. I think it was in The Hill. Said, let's end the gangs. No more gangs. Let's just have, a committee process. We're going through it right now with permitting reform. I've been a part of 2 groups, ad hoc groups, led by Joe Manchin, on permitting reform. We made some decent progress, but we weren't going through the committee process. Now it's in the Energy and Natural Resource Committee, which Joe chairs, along with John Barrasso from Wyoming as a ranking member, and they're going through it. That's a much better way to do it. Now, ultimately, most of these reforms are going to have to come back to our committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, because they're environmental issues, NEPA and whatnot. But all of that said, I think it comes down to process, transparency, doing our business in the plain view of the public on in committees and C-SPAN and all of those things. I think it comes down to that. We have to restore that, or we're never going to have. And by the way, it also, what it does is it does unify people. Most of the members that object to a lot of these things object to them because they weren't part of the process, and we've definitely lost that. We need to restore it.
And I agree with that. We've had the regular order, and in fact, I want to talk to you a little bit about the leadership race and I guess what you're seeing there to replace Mitch McConnell. But again, I mean, in this particular situation with this bill, I mean, you said what's preventing it from being introduced in committee is just laziness. You don't think Donald Trump being basically opposed to this bill and not wanting to do anything until after the election, that doesn't have anything to do with it?
For sure, it has something to do with particularly House Republicans not wanting to take it up. And that's the other issue. You know, when the speaker says it's dead on arrival, you do sort of lose a little of the wind in your sails. Then why would you want to take tough political votes that are going to cost you if, in fact, there's not a policy outcome on the other end? And I, as you know, I was pretty hard on the speaker when he said that. And I referred to a couple of bills that he's sent over as dead on arrival, particularly impeachment bills, things like that. It's like, okay, but what happened to dead on arrival? And I'm not, well, I think it's valuable for Republicans to visit with Republicans, across the Capitol. I spent a half hour in Jason Smith's office this morning, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, good friend, former colleague, because we have a pretty big tax bill that he and Ron Wyden have worked on, and he passed in the House, and now it's in the Senate. So I think there's value to doing that. But as an add-on, not as the way to pass legislation. But I also think that it's really important to remember that our founders created a bicameral Congress on purpose, not so that we could collaborate with one another, but rather so that we could sort of compete with one another. Yeah. We have the impulse of the House, of course, and the deliberation of the Senate, and the power of the states in the Senate, and the power of the mob, so to speak, in the House. It's all designed on purpose, and it's designed to be difficult.
So just and not to belabor the point, I will move on. But if the speaker, I mean, why then let the speaker kill your motivation? Like, he's in a separate chamber. He's the Speaker of the House, not the Speaker of the Senate. Right. So why not? I mean, even if he says dead on arrival, maybe the Senate should still just do their business, pass their bill.
I'm in that camp,
and then prove it.
Exactly in that camp.
Yeah.
I exactly agree. And this is why, for example, in the recently passed supplemental defense bill, I voted for that. John Hoeven and I voted for that. We're in the minority on the Republican side of things. And the speaker said it's dead on arrival if it comes over here, But instead of not sending it over there, what I did is I called Donald Trump the day before the vote. And I said, "Here's the deal. I'm going to vote for this thing." There were 3 or 4 of us, I guess, on the phone with him. And I said, "I'm voting for the bill, but I want to encourage the House to do their job and fix a couple of things. And a couple of things I would like to fix are things that he supports. And one of those things, of course, is turning the grants into a loan with favorable terms, things like never maturing and no interest, and it's a loan that looks a lot like a grant, but it does is if Ukraine does well, and then maybe they provide us with some of their critical minerals or some of Vladimir Putin's locked up resources, or if once Israel prevails, there's just ways to do this thing that bring more people to the fight. But I still voted for the bill and send it over with some strong signals to the House Republicans. Hey, make this a better bill and send it back to us. But for Pete's sake, let's do it. So I think I've demonstrated I'm in that camp that you're describing. Our politics is making it harder all the time, to your other point.
So you said 2 things about the leadership thing. On a previous podcast, you said, like, the one thing you're asking for a leader is return to regular order.
Yep.
And then I heard you tell somebody else that you were looking forward to seeing how many dinners from people named John you could get as this process. And the joke there being that the front, a lot of the people who I guess are in the running, so to say, for the for the job are named John. Senator John Thune,
Right.
Senator John Cornyn. First of all, have you been getting dinner from some of these Johns? And how have those conversations been going about regular order?
Yeah, great questions. Actually, we dine together all the time.
Well, right. I'm not meaning to imply that anything untoward.
No.
Right.
Nor was I when I said it. And of course, all the Capitol Press Corps got the joke.
Yeah.
The thing about of that, we do all dine together. And I'll be honest, the Johns buy a lot of meals because they are in leadership positions, and it's about the only thing you can do is buy each other meals, and because no one else can buy us meals. All of that said, they're going well, and what's interesting, Rob, and I think I may have mentioned to you, I think Mitch McConnell did us a favor providing this long runway. Now, it certainly provides opportunity for mischief or surprises, but see, I think that adds value as opposed to, oh gosh, we have a week to decide this, which John should I vote for? It provides opportunity for people to audition, if you will, and to show their stuff and do it through the course of business. And the way that's going to this point is two of the Johns, as I like to say, are in fact running for majority leader. John Cornyn of Texas and John Thune of South Dakota. And I can talk about them in a minute. The third John that was a possibility is John Barrasso, who is our conference chair. John's from Wyoming. He has decided not to run for majority leader, but instead is running for what's called assistant majority leader, oftentimes referred to as the whip. So John Barrasso is running for the job that John Thune has. John Thune has the job that John Cornyn used to have. We have 3-year term limits on all of our leadership positions except for the main leader. And with John Cornyn and John Thune both clearly in the race, the discussions have begun between each of us and each of them. And I think most people are leaning one way or the other, but not saying a lot. The two Johns in this case are very similar. They're similar in some respects. They're similar in demeanor. They're both pretty calm, neither one prone to emotion, neither one prone to impulse. They know the conference really well. They know how the machinery works, both of them having been whip. So they're similar. I would say they're both probably about equally conservative as well, conservative but pragmatic. John Cornyn, while he's from Texas, he does much better in elections than Ted Cruz does in Texas. But he probably doesn't do as well with the Republican Party as Ted Cruz does. And so they're just similar men in terms of their demeanor. I don't know which one's younger, to be honest with you. I suppose John Thune's a little younger. He's my age. John
Seems
Cornyn,
younger, but sometimes that
not a lot. Well, I know, right, Rob? But no, I think probably that's true. So that said, I think if it comes down to one-on-one, it's going to be tough. I suspect, at least I wouldn't be surprised if there ends up being at least one other candidate, because we do have that sort of freedom caucus now in the Senate, if you will. Mike Lee, Josh Hawley. Although they're more, in the case of Josh and J.D. Vance, you have more of a populist version of conservatism. And guys like Mike Lee, you have, and Rand Paul, you have more of a libertarian part. But they sort of gang up together, if you will, and I say that affectionately. So there's going to be 10, 12 of them, Rick Scott, Ron Johnson, who may be looking for an alternative to the two Johns. They'd almost certainly have to decide on one of them. Rick Scott having run before would be perhaps a logical choice. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. But remembering this, we're going to have a big election, and those newly elected senators-elect, between their election and being sworn in, will also have a vote on this. So it could very well come down to a 3-person race that's very narrowly divided between the three, in which case you'd have multiple ballots. So it's a lot to say that it's going to be a big fall, particularly if we get the majority. Because if you just to play it out, and you like to do this sort of thing, so you're a good teammate on this. Play out the scenarios. See, if Carrie Lake wins in Arizona, and it looks like she probably will. If Jim Justice wins in West Virginia, and he almost certainly will. But then you have, Tim Sheehy in Montana, whose politics is probably, certainly right of center, quite a bit right of center. But he's a Navy SEAL, American hero veteran. Is going to be strong on veterans issues and strong on national defense issues. You're going to have a mix of people, and then who knows? You could have Sam Brown, is his name, down in Nevada, who's a great candidate and a veteran, a war hero himself. You could have Larry Hogan, the former governor of Maryland, running for an open seat in Maryland. There's a lot that could happen that could determine the outcome of these races. So stay tuned.
For you personally, does Senator Thune being geographically close to? I mean, he's the senator from South Dakota. As we like to call the lesser Dakota. No, I'm kidding.
Certainly the lower one, right?
The lower one. I'm joking. Our friends in South Dakota, don't be mad at me.
Only a little, guys.
Only a little. Yeah. Does that figure into this at all? I mean, I just asking from somebody. I mean, I don't know the
it's a
calculus.
Great question. It's a logical question, right? And the reason it's a logical question is because it's a logical consideration. What's probably more important to me even than the proximity of the two of us, although that's a factor in the relationship, is that John Thune and I have known each other a long time. We were the executive directors of the South Dakota and North Dakota Republican parties in the 1990 election cycle.
In some ways, you could say Thune, like what happened in North Dakota, where we had, sort of long time, Democrats had our federal offices for a long time. I mean, really, Senator Thune beating Tom Daschle was kind of the first one through the fence in some ways.
It was sort of the beginning of the end, for sure. And in terms of Democrat dominance in the Dakotas. So now John Thune did serve in the House. So he won a House seat shortly after he was executive director of the Republican Party in South Dakota. And of course, it was an at-large House seat. And he sort of began the trend. And then you're right, when he defeated Tom Daschle, at that point, there were no Republicans in the United States Senate from North Dakota, South Dakota, or Montana. Now, of course, they're all Republican except John Tester. And until John Thune won the House race, there were no Republicans in the House from those states. And so we went from 0 for 9 now to right now we have 9 out of 10 because Montana has, of course, 2 House seats now. So it's really changed a lot, and John Thune is a part of that change. He's been a very big part of that change. He's also been immensely popular in South Dakota, whereas Tom Daschle's popularity waned after he became a member of leadership. John Thune's is just the opposite. I think they like the fact that he's got a high profile. He carries himself well, represents them well. Sometimes the far right gets grumpy with him, but in the long run, they are very he's just immensely popular there.
So I know Senator Cramer was kind enough to do this interview in between votes. He's sitting in what he called a hidey hole in Congress, a hideaway. But last question, Kevin. One of the things that you had talked about was regular order, and I'm just wondering, have you had conversations with them? I mean, how important is that going to be when you talk to them about it? I mean, do they care about it? I mean, how?
They totally care. Remembering that both John Thune and John Cornyn have lived through the frustration of this process as the number 2 person in the conference. Both of them speak to it a lot. It's always a little bit of a sensitive topic because, of course, Mitch McConnell's always in the room, and he's become part of the problem in terms of sort of liking the concentration of power that comes with these fiscal cliffs, for example, and then forcing this kind of a debate and discussion. I mean, Mitch was a strong proponent, of course, and is a strong proponent of the supplemental defense bill. He was also one of his tactics was, of course, to get some border security on it so that we could gain more Republican votes. That was a demand of conservatives, not a demand of the left. So it became a tool, and he helped shape, the small gang led by James Lankford to negotiate these things. So that said, no, I have been so emphatic on this point, Rob. in individual discussions with the two Johns, and as well as with our conference. I mean, I say it emphatically so that they get how serious I am about it. I will not vote for somebody who doesn't not just say they're going to do it, but convince me that they're going to return to regular order.
What would they have to do to convince you? I mean, what would that look like? So
here's one of the things I'd like to see. I want to see their calendar. I want them to show me their first year calendar if they should become majority leader for the year. And why that's important is because the Senate, as you know, being the most deliberative body in the world, takes a lot of time to do things. We just talked about the 30 hours between votes on moving something forward without unanimous consent. Well, that means if you're going to take up one of the 12 appropriations bills, and let's pick a tough one, let's take Homeland Security, then I want to see what 2-week time frame in June are you going to set aside and put on the calendar for this is when that bill will be on the floor. We won't be able to deal with judges or cabinet secretaries or undersecretaries. We're going to, for these 2 weeks, that's what we're going to do. If they start showing me that calendar and publish that calendar, I'm going to be more convinced than if they say, well, if elected, I work closely with you and your team to do better. That doesn't cut it with me.
Well, I hope so. I guess one last question too is, how does the Senate avoid the sort of and understanding that the Senate in certain fundamental ways is different from the House of Representatives, but we all saw the debacle that was the House trying to choose a leader. How does the Senate avoid that, or avoid a situation where we have these factions and if Republicans are in the majority after the election, this majority can't pick a leader?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We'll be able to do that, and the reason is the difference is one of the biggest differences is the rules in the House, and when Kevin McCarthy sort of agreed to this simple move to be able to dislodge the speaker with such a small number, one member calling for the vote, he gave up too much, in my view. He gave too much power to the rank and file membership. You can give the rank and file membership a lot of respect and honor by allowing them, to do regular order, but what you shouldn't be able to do is one member get rid of that person, or at least call for a vote to get rid of that person. And remembering too that Senate Majority Leader is not ultimately elected by the minority. They're elected only, both leaders are elected only by their party. There's nobody in the Senate Majority, anybody in the Senate Majority that's elected that's an heir to the White House or to the presidency, except the President pro tem. And that's more of a tradition than it is a significant position. So I think, and it takes a majority of the conference to select a leader. So we really have that safeguard pretty well built in. With remembering really a lot of the angst you've been hearing about Mitch, for example, prior to his announcement that he wasn't seeking another term as leader, came from a lot of people. It sounded like it was a chorus saying we need to get rid of Mitch. This proved we have to dump Mitch. All that. Well, it's the same 10 people that voted against him when he won overwhelmingly in this most recent race. It's just a little bit easier to sort of decipher the noise over here with only 49 of us rather than 225 of us, or 100 of us versus 435 of us. So it's just sort of naturally built into our structure.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate your time as always.
My pleasure. It was fun. Thanks, Rob.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.